Today on Health Talk, we're discussing child abuse. Types of abuse.
There are different types of abuse. We've got physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and we have children being neglected by their parents, children getting lost. So we refer to all of those as abuse.
And later look at children's rights.
Child abuse is the physical, sexual, or emotional maltreatment or neglect of a child or children. It can occur anywhere, in a child's home, school, neighborhood, or for that matter, any environment where you can find a child. The perpetrators can be anyone, from parents, neighbors, caregivers, older siblings, older schoolmates, teachers, and the list goes on and on. Just this week, a man was accused of killing his 2-day-old baby when he used that baby as a weapon to attack his girlfriend. So today we discuss child abuse and focus a lot more on an area that is perhaps not as well recognized as it should be, and that is abuse to babies. So stay tuned to learn more about this and what role you can play in preventing this terrible scourge. So share your views, concerns, or questions by calling us on Johannesburg 714-6843, 6857, or 6847. Or interact with us on Facebook, SABC Health Talk, and on Twitter at SABC Health Talk, including our email address, of course, which is healthtalk@sabc.co.za. I'm Dr. Sello Mutaung, and this is Health Talk.
Child abuse. It happens every day, and still there are so many myths and misconceptions about it.
It is estimated that at least 2 out of every 10 girls and 1 out of every 10 boys are sexually abused at some point in their lives.
Both boys and girls are exposed to abuse. We cannot say that girls are more likely to be abused than girls. I think they all face the same realities of our society.
Sandy Mohape gave some advice on how to spot symptoms on an abused child.
In a case of a child being sexually abused, what you have to pick up first would be the physical symptoms, how a child walks, is there anything different, is the child showing signs of pain, and then you'd follow up and go to a physician, to a doctor. In terms of emotional abuse, children are exposed to emotional abuse sometimes at school through bullying. So sometimes the child will be withdrawn, the child won't be so confident, and that's when you have to engage with the child, especially if the child refuses to go to school.
Most children find it very difficult to open up when abused.
Children are very different, and sometimes they might be scared to open up to you. So we always encourage that the child get someone that they trust, that they could speak to. It can either be the mother themselves, or it can be a teacher, or it can be a family member within the extended family. Also go to social workers within the societies providing therapy.
Child abuse perpetrators are not limited to strangers. With friends, neighbors, family members, and even parents have been found guilty of abuse acts. If ever there are signs of child abuse, Childline is always there to assist in such cases.
Any child that wants to talk to us, the counselors are available right throughout the year. Whether they want to just say something or they want to share their joys, our number is 080 555 55.
Younger children are at a greater risk of being killed as a result of child abuse, and older children are much less likely to experience fatal abuse or neglect, but are likely to commit suicide related to abuse. This 11-year-old girl was raped by 3 different men within a year, and her 14-year-old friend was also raped.
My friend told me that her grandmother had sent her for something, but on our way she got into a house where we found a man who started raping me, and after he was finished with me, he raped my friend.
He might come back soon. He says he loves me. I love him too.
Okay, you may have come across terms like abusive head trauma, shaken baby syndrome, inflicted traumatic brain injury, shaken impact syndrome. Now, all of these mean the same thing, an injury to a child's brain as a result of child abuse. Now, to help us understand the consequences of this child abuse, the long-term and, short-term effects, we have some special guests, expert guests, who will help us out. First up is Professor Lorna Jacqueline, who's a neurodevelopmental pediatrician at Wits University, but also at the Teddy Bear Clinic. And with her is Vincentia Dlamini Ngobese, otherwise known as Buchi, who is a child abuse prevention specialist from Women and Men Against Child Abuse. Ladies, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this is a very difficult subject, and in the inset there we spoke about several forms of child abuse. Perhaps, Prof, let's start with you. Can you just take us through different forms of abuse to children?
So, just looking at it generally, we'll talk about physical abuse,
right.
And that's where this non-accidental head injuries to babies comes
right.
in.
Right.
So, where the trauma is mainly physical, but it can never be physical. If right. you're abusing your child or hurting your child physically, the child is damaged emotionally.
Right.
And then sexual abuse, right. Where there may be physical abuse as well, but there's always emotional abuse to the children. So right. They're not separate things. They right. all go together.
Right, right. I mean, obviously, I think all these other forms of physical abuse, obvious ones where parents or anybody for that matter actually hits children, physically, perhaps are well known. But there's this concept of this shaken baby syndrome or something to that effect. Do you want to just perhaps tell us what that is?
And I think this has been our country.
Right.
It's a hidden form of injury to children,
right.
because for myself as well, it's the most difficult type of abuse to understand, where you've got usually young people, they've got this little baby, the baby can't stand up for itself, and yet something within the emotional state of these parents make them damage this young baby. It's really so different to other forms of abuse, and I think that for medical practitioners it's inconceivable, and I think that we struggle to face this, and we've just started an initiative to start giving doctors skills in managing it, giving them skills in identifying, and in the end we can't let it continue. About a third of these children die.
Okay. You talk about the medical professionals, but perhaps let's find out from Buchi. How common is this? I mean, you deal a lot with forms of abuse in general. How common is this shaken baby syndrome?
I think generally child abuse is underreported, and for shaken baby syndrome it becomes even more underreported, because with child abuse, you'll have children that will disclose, but infants can't disclose what really happened to them.
Right.
So it's one of those hidden forms of abuse that health workers need to be trained and need to have the skills to identify the signs that the children present in their healthcare services.
Yeah. And I suppose the community as well needs to be aware of this. I suppose that's why we're doing this program in the first place. Now, maybe let's just come back to what actually happens. Maybe, we may not be aware of what actually, what the consequences of shaking a baby are. Just
and
take us through
that's
that.
partly why you've got all these different names which you outline.
Yeah.
In the end, the brain gets damaged. So sometimes the baby gets shaken, and sometimes the baby gets hit against an object, so that you get a fractured skull.
Yeah.
But you don't need to have a fractured skull. Just that pure shaking, excessive shaking of the baby causes the brain to move at a different rate within the skull, so that as the skull is moving, the brain's moving at a different rate, and you get that bleeding happening. And different parts of the brain have also got a different amount of fluid in them. So different parts of the brain are also moving at a different rate. So you've got all this, as you shake the baby, you've got all this these things moving in the baby's head.
Quite scary. I mean, that innocent baby can't protect itself.
And the brain of a young baby floats in CSF.
Right.
Our brains have got very little CSF, fluid around the brain, but the baby's brain is floating. So this happens, and the babies have got big heads relative to their size, and they've got little thin heads. So it's very easy that if you shake the baby for their head to be moving to and fro, and these babies get irretrievable brain damage. These 30% of these children, as I said, die, and 30% have got severe brain damage, and the other 30% have got learning problems. So, I mean, the consequences of this are long-term and very damaging.
What sort of signs and symptoms are common with this kind of problem? I would imagine not very easy, but some of them are quite obvious.
Yes.
Which ones do you normally see?
Health workers need to look out for, breathing problems as children are coming, and children will be extremely irritable, like crying non-stop. Children will be lethargic, like extreme tiredness, and those are just the minor signs, and sometimes seizures that you look out for as your children are coming in, and your fractured bones as they come in as well. It's just a few of those symptoms that healthcare workers need to look at when children are presenting at the health facilities.
What sort of ages are we talking about here? Are we talking about young babies? What sort of ages?
So I've just been reviewing all the children that we've seen over the past few years, and they're all practically all under one. The prime age is about 3 months to 5 months. We had one little baby that was 5 weeks old, so very young babies. And it's the age when babies can't talk. All they do is cry and feed. And somehow young parents just can't deal with that crying of the baby.
Very, very scary. All right, maybe let's just hold it here, because I just want us to get into understanding why parents, or anybody for that matter, would do something this horrible. So when we return, we try and understand why some parents abuse babies. So please stay with us.
Coming to you live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to AM News on SABC News. We're on DSTV channel 404. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be taking you through all the developing stories, all the leading stories in South Africa, in the continent of Africa and the rest of the world. The power utility has attributed the current wave of load shedding to what it has described as unforeseen technical problems at current power stations. Eskom has warned that there is a risk of a total blackout if consumers do not use electricity sparingly.
We must work together to make this world better for all. This is what Nelson Mandela told us. He taught us a very important lesson.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Now, listening to stories of parents abusing innocent babies is horrific, to say the least. But what sort of parent abuses a baby, and for what reason? Let's find out from our expert guests. And we're now joined by Luc Lamprecht, who's director of the Shaken, Abused and Abandoned Baby Initiative. Luke, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much.
Right. Prof, maybe let's just then start around the issue of diagnosis. Because there's been, let's face it, controversies around this diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome. And that's why perhaps, there's all these terminologies, different terminologies. How do you diagnose, how can you be sure that a baby that is brought to a healthcare facility has shaken baby syndrome?
Firstly, a high level of suspicion.
Right.
If you don't suspect it, you're probably going to miss it. And once you suspect it, then we've got a whole lot of things that we do. We look into the baby's eyes, because as the brain is shaken, there's bleeding into the back of the baby's eyes. And that's a very useful sign. Then we do a skeletal survey, because as the baby is shaken, the person holding the baby fractures the baby's ribs. So you get fractured ribs, and then you can get fractures of the other bones. And once we suspect it, because he's bleeding into the brain, if the doctor looks at the blood count of the baby, he'll see that the blood count is down. But then you follow up with brain scans, and then you get the answer.
Yeah.
So it's the suspicion that leads you to the brain scan, which is then definitive information.
Now, look, parents often deny when they get questioned about these things. And they come with all sorts of stories. And you have first-hand experience with that. Do you want to perhaps take us through that?
I think the first thing is that what we notice is that children have often been hurt before. So when we actually start doing the x-rays and the brain scans, we'll see old, healed fractures, some atrophy in the brain that predates the current bleed. So there's a build-up, and it seems to increase in severity. So by the time the parents are coming to casualty generally, as Buchi was saying, with depressed levels of consciousness, seizures, coma, etc., they have to come because the babies are in a life-threatening condition. So they start making up stories, and the most common story is what we call the killer couch. So it's, I was sitting on the couch with my baby, my 2-month-old was on the bed and rolled off and fell on its head, and that's how it happened. And the big thing with the history taking is we have to be very accurate, because we need to be able to tie the injury to the history the parents give to see if the two match each other. And without exception, the parents I've interviewed, which have been many, they've never matched. So they've lied all the time.
Let's try and understand the profile of this parent that abuses a baby.
So what we've found is they're usually young, but not always. There's no typical parent. But it's a situation where there's marital conflict. These are isolated people. They're people where they're not getting support from the wider community. So it's a woman that doesn't have a good relationship with her mother. But if you look into their own childhood, substance abuse has been a big problem in many of our families.
Buchi, I'm reminded by something when I see your T-shirt, Women and Men Against Child Abuse.
Yes.
I believe that men are more likely to be the perpetrators of shaken baby syndrome than women. How far true is that?
Yes, I think numbers and statistics have shown that most of the time, because these majority of young women who are in this relationship, there's history of relationship violence where the partner becomes violent, and the abuse of substance is also common in those. And obviously, because this woman doesn't have support system, she has nowhere to go, and she's relying on this abusive parent, and this is where we find these men being perpetrators of non-accidental injuries to infants.
But what type of men, though? Could it be, sometimes people talk about stepfathers or boyfriends, where there's no biological relationship with the child. Does that come into play at all?
Even unfortunately, that we also see biological parents, biological fathers, inflicting these injuries to their infants. But for babies to be abused, they're abused by those closer to them. So obviously, you'll find it's the fathers, the stepfathers that are perpetrators of.
Look, what about poverty and stress? People tend to talk about that a lot,
Look, the additional stresses on young isolated families definitely do play a role, and money is a big one. What we have found is that there's increased levels of violence in the poorer people, or the higher the levels of violence. And the more money people have, the more subtle the findings that we have. So there is a correlation between the severity and the socioeconomic conditions of the family.
So let me understand this. Is it worse in poorer circumstances than in
it's not worse is a difficult word, because I don't want to make poor people, out to be more abusive.
Right.
But there tends to be a higher degree of violence. In other words, the injuries we see, the injuries are more severe.
Right.
But you can have long-term abuse in the more affluent families, because they can hide behind the private practitioners for months, as we have seen. So money gives access to the ability to hide it better.
Yeah. This is quite an interesting problem here, that you're looking at the profile of this parent. Okay, we focused on men, but what about the woman herself? There's often talk around younger single parents. Your comment?
It's unstable relationships. So the woman may not actually be the person perpetrating the violence, but she's unable to protect her baby against the violence. And that's where they're not single women, they're in unstable relationships. So there's usually a man in the relationship, but it's not a stable relationship. So these women come with their own inability to stand up and protect their newly born baby. And there's a lack of attachment. There's a lack of attachment by both partners. So the male partner hasn't attached to this baby in a meaningful way. And the mother hasn't attached in such a way that she can protect her child. So we are talking about attachment to this baby before it was born, because these are young babies, and then carrying that attachment behavior into these young babies' lives.
Okay, I mean, we've been obviously going through the risk factors, trying to understand the profile and so on. But when you do get to, interview people and they come out, what reasons do they give, for abusing the children?
Okay, well, as I said earlier, we've had one in our entire 10, 11 year sort of studying this, one who actually confessed and said, look, I was very frustrated. I felt that my wife was paying more attention to the baby. I wasn't working. This was the man. I wasn't working. I got frustrated. I didn't know how to care for this baby. My wife's not there. And I just got so frustrated, I shook and bashed the baby. That's one. The others will say, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I by accident bumped my child's head, or I was washing the baby and the baby slipped because of the soap and fell in the bath. And so they give you a lot of, they don't ever give a reason. There's many excuses, but there's never really a reason given.
Okay, let's move away from the parents for a while, because there are other people that can abuse babies. I don't even want to go back into that story of that Ugandan, caregiver that abused the baby. But let's maybe just talk about caregivers. Your comment?
Caregiver is another story. We have seen those caregivers that have been abusing children, because I think with the high level of unemployment, people just go into other fields wanting to be caregivers, not because of passion that they really want to care for this baby, but there's nothing else they can do in the community. And even parents, because of they need to work so that they can, they can deal with the upkeep of the family, and they resort to getting, people that are available at that time, because they become frustrated. Who's going to care for the baby as I leave? And unfortunately, we do see a lot of caregivers abusing children, and those stories that we don't want to get into have highlighted that it is. And I think also we, as parents that are under strain, and sometimes you do get parents that would say, but there was no other person that could look out for this baby. So I just had to get anybody from the street who was available to look, because I was scared that I was going to be fired if I don't go to work.
Difficult times. But maybe just focusing on the baby himself or herself now. Oftentimes the stories about babies that cry a lot, that can drive mothers or even fathers, up the wall. And babies that have some sort of disability. Your comment, Prof?
So the babies that are at higher risk, and we said the babies where the parents haven't attached for whatever reason, but then babies premature babies, so babies where parents haven't been given the opportunity to actually attach because the baby's been in hospital for 3 months, and by the time the mother takes over the baby, she hasn't connected with the baby. Disabled children, especially blind children, are at very high risk because they don't make eye contact. And then the crying baby, the baby which just is a difficult temperament. And these are the babies where we as medical practitioners should be really alert and really be sure. This lady that killed her babies in England, where she wasn't actually, the medical professional weren't actually understanding her emotional needs and addressing them. So we've got a responsibility.
Difficult one. Maybe in the next segment we'll try and give out tips, to say how do you deal with babies that cry a lot, and how do you cope with that situation. All right. When we return, we'll learn how to recognize early warning signs or impending child abuse. Please stay with us.
Cameroon's economic capital, a unique art collection is on display. Titled Yesterday's Memory, Tomorrow's Memory.
We are trying to preserve this heritage despite many things that have changed in the designing, embroidery and the model.
If I'm telling you, you don't like it, I call it defeat.
Join Musam Khalipi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
Zoom into Africa. This is Seychelles. The president is Mr. James Michel James. Seychelles got independent from United Kingdom on 29 June in 1976. The population is over 80,000 people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is the Seychelles rupee.
Welcome back. And before we start with this segment, I believe we have a caller on the line, and it's Sibaba from Cape Town. Sibaba, welcome.
Hi, sir.
Right. Your question or comment, please?
Yes, I would like to make a comment and also a question with regard to the matter discussing today.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen an incident where a child was abused. The case was followed up, but the end result of the case was that actually the case was thrown out because of the inconsistencies with the statement from the mother and also the child.
Right.
But also, it looks like the child's testimonies are not being taken into consideration or rather seriously. I don't know whether it's the nature of the child being young or maybe we just don't take this matter seriously or what from the court. I just want to know what would be the options going further in terms of pursuing such cases where the case was thrown out because of the testimonies between the mother or the child was not taken into consideration.
Okay.
How do I pursue this case further from there?
All right, that's an interesting one. Thank you very much for your question. Let's hear from our experts. I mean, this is around the strength of evidence, inconsistencies between what the mother says and, whether or not testimonies from children is acceptable. Your comment?
Okay, the criminal justice system is not set up to deal with children. Historically, it's an adversarial system. It's a system where we fight with one another. We saw in the Oscar Pistorius trial, it's my word versus your word. And I think we're still in a place in our society where the word of a child is not taken with as much strength as the word of an adult.
Right.
So I think it's inherently biased against children. babies obviously don't have a voice, so the only voice that the babies has is the doctors and the people who do the interviews with the parents. So we need to be a voice for children. And in terms of inconsistencies, you know, the difficulty with an adversarial system is that you can't be putting innocent people in jail. So it's that whole story of rather that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man goes to jail, because the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's not good for children's cases. The system.
Yeah. All right. I suppose that's. Do you want to maybe comment?
But just to comment that there is that, but then there is protection of systems. So even if we can't, the criminal system doesn't help. There are other ways for us to actually deal with the problems and keep children safe. So there are two mechanisms running in parallel with each other. So we've got to use, if we can't win with one system, we've got to use another system. And the bottom line is to try to keep children safe.
Yeah. But again, I mean, it must be very frustrating to whoever it is that, you know, takes up this case, you know, to lay a criminal charge, and in the end the case gets thrown out because, you know, there isn't, you know, sufficient evidence. I would imagine even more difficult where there's clear evidence of a child being injured, isn't that so? Your comment?
Yeah, it's very frustrating for everyone who wants justice for this child. But the reality, like Luke has said, that it's very difficult in children's cases. And most of the time, when these cases are presented, they are not your fresh cases. It's like your chronic cases. And it's difficult to get, you know, evidence, like your DNA evidence, if it has happened, you know, in December, as opposed to a fresh, you know, child abuse case that just happened now. And those factors come into place. And as people that are working and want to work and protect children, it is frustrating. Even for mothers themselves, it becomes very frustrating. But what needs the parents need to think about is that as much as they didn't get criminal justice, as Professor Lona said, that we need to protect our children in terms of if the criminal justice did not help, how do we safeguard the safety of the children? How do I stay safe? How do I seek other places, places where I'll feel safe with my child? If this happened at home, where do I go as a parent who, as a child, and this father says they were not abused? How do we have supervised visits? Those kind of things that can be put in place to protect the child, even if the criminal justice system did not win.
All right. Okay, at this stage, you know, for the next few segments or so, we're going to be focusing on prevention. And it's appropriate at this time to cross over to our Devon studio, where we're joined by another guest, Ms. Dumile Nala, who's the CEO of Childline. Dumile, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Just now, we spent quite a bit of time on, you know, risk factors, understanding, you know, the profile of those people that abuse children. And of course, as part of prevention, it's important to recognize these risk factors. From the Childline perspective, what is your view in terms of prevention of child abuse? Where does it start?
I think in terms of prevention, we have to recognize that the family is an important space where children grow, and it's an important space where children should be protected and cared for. So as a community, as a society, we really need to put our efforts in terms of supporting the family structure. We know there are challenges within the family home, within the individuals in that family or a particular family, but we really need to look at our prevention and early intervention resources towards a family structure so that children are kept within families but kept in a safe and secure space in their family homes.
Interesting. Bukhi, just now, you know, offline we were chatting about the fact that, I mean, you were quite strong on this thing that prevention starts at planning pregnancies and so on. Please take us through that.
Yes, I think even Professor spoke about attachment issues, because if you're not attached to your baby while in utero, it's going to be difficult to care for that baby. So when women need to be given options, if they go to family planning settings, that is why we need friendly family planning services to say, when a woman comes in, has a health worker that is approachable, and when she finds difficult with the kind of method that she used and wants to move to another one because this one she cannot manage with oral contraceptives, then the other options, we start there. This is how, because we don't want unplanned and unwanted babies. So I think we need to look into that and say, and talk to our sexually active youth, sexually, to say that if you engage in sexual activity, you need to plan it, and because we need to acknowledge that a lot of children are unwanted babies currently.
Yeah, that's a huge risk factor there. Now, Prof, let's just go back to that one issue that is often a big risk factor, and that is the crying baby, or a baby that cries excessively, I suppose, insofar as the parent is concerned. Now, maybe let's just go through why some babies cry excessively.
So crying is normal.
Right.
And crying excessively is normal. But I think that the first port of call is going to be to check that the baby isn't ill.
Right.
It hasn't got an ear infection, there isn't some medical reason which is manageable. And once the doctor's got that, is to give the parents the skills in soothing the baby. But in the end, if the baby's going to be the kind of baby that cries excessively, what do you do? How do you manage yourself when your baby's crying excessively?
What are those coping skills that you need?
It's your coping skills.
Right.
That's why Childline's valuable. I mean, pick up the phone, speak to Childline. Say, I don't know what to do, and get advice from Childline.
Well, talk about Childline. Maybe let's invite a comment from Dumi. What coping skills do you give to mothers, in terms of getting through the frustrations of a crying child and so on?
So what we normally do when parents phone us and they are frustrated, because really sometimes parents feel, I've done everything, I've checked the nappy, I've done this, I've done that, and this child continues to cry. So we will try to calm the parent down first, because usually baby is continuing with the crying and mom is frustrated. So it's about calming the parent first, and also asking questions that will help the parent to look at what else do I need to do to calm my baby. And there are strategies that family use in order to soothe a little one, carrying them and walking them outside. But in some instances, we may find that it's also about how the parent is feeling. It is about what the parent is going through. So we may suggest things like, if there's another family member, for a parent to ask the family member to help them in terms of looking after the baby. Maybe the parent or the mother may need some rest. Maybe they need some fresh air and just go out and breathe a bit. So it really depends on the circumstances of that individual parent and what they are going through at that point in time. So it's really important that they use services like Childline, because it's not only for children, but for parents who are concerned and who are caring for the little ones.
Well, I mean, sure, extended family. I would imagine that's a more ideal kind of setup, especially in young mothers and so on. But are relatives necessarily the kind of people that could be trusted, if you like?
I think it depends on the living conditions.
Yeah.
In areas like Deep Slot, Alex, it's impossible, because you live in your own shack, your relatives are not there. So who's your support structure? Who's around you, who's family, who's here. And if you don't have a good relationship with your parent, how do you call your mom and say, Mom, I'm pregnant, do you want to come and stay with me? Yeah. So those are the other factors that we need to look into. You need to look into. And when those women are presenting in our antenatal clinics, we need to say, who's going to assist you with the child? Do you have somebody to help you? Do you have a neighbor that's there to help you when you're really feeling exhausted? So we need to be having this discussion with our mothers at antenatal clinics, and also at our mother and baby facilities when we do our your 30-day visits postnatal.
Okay. Look, one of the outcomes of this is that some parents may actually end up abandoning these children. Now, your initiative is Shaken Baby and Abandoned Babies Initiative. Where do these abandoned babies come from, and what are the circumstances around that?
Okay, so it's very difficult to say, where they come from because we can't find the parents, So it's a very but we believe that the parents the child was first abandoned by the father. So generally, it's a single mother who has got pregnant, finds herself in the city looking for work. Often, I think the sexual interactions are contractual. So, in other words, the woman needs a man in order to have a place to live and somewhere to stay. And we're getting babies abandoned in various contexts. The first context is the late-term terminations of pregnancy, sort of your post-26-week babies who are actually literally thrown in drains and abandoned to die. And then you have got up to babies who are abandoned in places like the Door of Hope, where the parent's intention for abandoning the child is to get better care. That's where you put the baby through the window and the bell rings and someone comes and collects the baby. Okay. There the parent's intention is not that the child is harmed, whereas the first category that I explained, the intention is abandonment with the intention of death. Our big catchment areas is inner city Johannesburg, sort of down right through the sort of main vein down the middle of Joburg, where we're probably getting one abandoned baby per working day of the year in Joburg.
Right, okay. Let's just hold it off there because we need to go for a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll continue our story on prevention of child abuse. Stay where you are.
Food for thought, in the words of Ray Davis. Remember, a challenge only becomes an obstacle when you bow to it.
Of dedication and perseverance, Abayani Maitakore made history as one of South Africa's best performing matriculants of 2014, attaining 7 distinctions.
I believe that nothing should stand in your way if you see yourself in the future doing something great. So I just carried on and I never gave up. Though the circumstances I faced were challenging, I love challenges, so I was like, yeah man, bring it on, I can do it.
Join me, Refiwe Muiba, on Bophelong, your show about those who take on and conquer life's challenges, every Saturday at 17:30.
Children have been and continue to be abused, tortured, mistreated, neglected, and abandoned by people in their communities. Some children are not treated with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves.
Talk about abuse, there are different types of abuse. We've got physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and we have children being neglected by their parents, children getting lost. So we refer to all of those as abuse, violation of children's rights.
All children have the right to be protected from all types of violence. Childline has a 24-hour service where they offer counseling to abused children.
We offer the brief counselling service in almost all the South African languages. We have trained counsellors that undergo regular training to be on the lines and to work with the children that call us. When we're facilitating child protection for children who are at risk, we rely very heavily on our stakeholders. We work very closely with the South African Police Service as well as other welfare organisations in the sector like your Department of Social Development and Child Welfare and other welfare organisations as well.
All children have the right to be educated about child abuse and the right to form youth groups to protect them from abuse. Everyone has the duty to report all violence against abuse and neglect of any child to the appropriate authorities.
What we advise children is call us on our helpline, speak to our counsellors. If you're not ready to talk yet, have a chat with us, see what response you get on the helpline with our counsellors. And when you're ready to talk, we're there to listen and to help.
Communities and families have the duty to protect their children from becoming homeless and abandoned.
Paramount importance that this problem of child abuse shouldn't be the police problem alone, but the community at large needs to get involved into this.
Special groups and organizations should be formed within communities to protect and counsel children from all types of violence.
Yeah. Children have rights, and as parents and communities, we also have responsibilities. So we're going to conclude this discussion by giving you tips, or rather, discussing what communities can do to prevent the scourge of child abuse. We still have our four guests: Professor Lorna Jacqueline, Buchi Dlamini, Luke Lamprecht, and from our Durban studios, Dumisile Nala from Childline. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's now, in this segment, try and, crystallize all of this so that we leave people with a take-home message. All right. Let's perhaps start within the family now. What is the responsibility of those around, someone in the family who has a baby? What responsibilities do they have in ensuring that, first of all, they spot early signs of possible risk? Let's start with you, Buchi.
I think, as we have explained, that children that are crying excessively, I think this is where, as a family, you need to tap in and assist that mother in terms of caring for this baby. If you are a sister, you are a brother, you're a husband, or a partner, because some partners feel it's a responsibility of the mother to care for this baby. But have turns, at night, just wake up as a partner as well and help with calming the baby and having those walks. Take the babies for walks and strolls. Just assist the mother that's going through this. I think it's very important that the people that are around help with the raising of this newborn baby.
Okay. Then there's the issue of, you might, as a neighbor, notice that something is not right, next door. Your comment?
Okay. So in terms of our child protection legislation, a person who has a suspicion that a child is being abused may report it to police or social workers, who will then come and investigate. But if you know a child is being abused, if you can see it and you hear it, you actually are under a legal obligation to report it to the police or a social worker. Otherwise, you yourself are guilty of an offence. And I think the reason that law was written was so that we can't shirk our responsibilities as all being protectors of children in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's get from Childline now and cross over to Durban and speak to Dumi. Dumi, we're talking prevention now. How can we help communities, or what responsibilities do communities have in preventing child abuse, starting with the family and close communities, as it were?
I think as communities, we need to recognize our responsibilities towards the fact that children, as we all know, yes, they belong to a family, but our family structures and our family units, they also need support. So it is like my colleagues have said, if you can see and you suspect that something is happening, maybe a child is crying continuously, you need to report that. Not necessarily that you're getting the other family into trouble, but they may need support. They may need support from social workers, from social services, from the police, or from Childline as such. So it's important that you report so they get the necessary support. But it's also about, as a community, to look at what can be done at community level as a society to create structures, be it mom and baby workshops that will assist parents in terms of learning more about how to raise their children, how to manage their children, particularly because we see a lot of young mothers now who may not have the wisdom and the life experience that will help them in supporting and nurturing their children. So it's also about the structures, the formal structures that exist, that they need to provide the necessary prevention and early intervention services to our communities. You know, it's basic things like, you know, do we have the necessary safe parks for children, for the young ones to play outside, for the parents to be able to walk with their children in a safe environment, because that is also important.
Prof, maybe the other area is the medical professionals now, because oftentimes, you know, as medical professionals, children get, you know, obviously brought to you or to a medical professional to consult for one problem or other. What is the responsibility of medical professionals? And medical professional includes nursing practitioners and doctors as well. What tip do you have for those medical professionals when they have suspicion of any possible child abuse?
You see, for medical professionals, we do the full cycle. So we're there when the woman's pregnant, we're there when she delivers the baby, we're there when the baby's been born and there's that newborn baby being brought to us for follow-up. We've got so many opportunities, if our eyes are open, to look at the way the mother's relating to that baby. So it's not clearly at the intervention when the baby's been injured, there's a role. But if we were more sensitive to looking at the mother-child interaction before something's happened, we could see that this mother she's depressed. She's not bonding. She's struggling with breastfeeding. You could see that the lack of relationship, the way she holds her baby. When the baby's crying, how does she cuddle the baby and soothe the baby? There's so many little opportunities if we're sensitive to that.
So then what should the medical professional then do when it's quite clear that there are signs of abuse on a child?
So we're saying even before abuse, this is where there's lack of a relationship. There are many, you could talk to the mother and find out what's going on.
Okay.
You know, and then you could refer appropriately, social workers, psychologists, no matter what, whether you are working in a state hospital, private sector, depending on the income, there's so many solutions.
So do something.
Do something.
All right.
Do something.
There I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it because we've run out of time. All right, so as you heard it, if you suspect any possible abuse on any child, you can contact the following numbers. The SAPS emergency number, of course, is 10111. The child line toll-free number is 0800 05 55 55. And the Crime Stop number, 08600 10 111. Or simply send an anonymous tip-off to 32211 by SMS, of course. Please let us take care of those young, innocent children and build a better society for the future. If you have to act, do it swiftly. That might secure a bright future for that child. Folks, it's on that note that we come to the end of our show today. Don't forget, share your views and comments on Facebook by going to SABC Health Talk and, of course, like our page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Health Talk. Send us an email at healthtalk@sabc.co.za. So join us again next week, same time on SABC News. And again, our repeat shows 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. every night. And of course, you can get the shows on the YouTube channel. So from me, Dr. Solomon Taung, and the entire crew here at Health Talk, it's a very warm goodbye. And thank you so much for watching the show with us. Cheerio.
Places some are afraid to go. Discussions some are afraid to have.
Leave the house. We're not going to say anything further than this.
But some have the courage to open their eyes. To go to those places, have those discussions.
You're pulling at least 18 hours a day.
Because sometimes Perceptions need to be altered.
It's been dubbed the trial of the century.
And when you get to a press conference,
they were hoping that that would stem the tide.
Stories need to be told in a language everyone can understand.
Once you have religious power, you can abuse people.
But they have got benefits. Free marijuana.
I can only hope that you media, you hear these things.
Everything you might have been afraid to ask, but need to know. SABC Current Affairs.
The rolling hills of KwaZulu-Natal are home to a great story of the Zulu nation. The epic story of Ushaka was told in movie form 29